In our last video, we introduced ourselves to syllables, which are bound by individual vowel phonemes in any particular word. In a multi-syllabic word where you have multiple vowel phonemes, there's going to be one of those phonemes in those syllables that is accented and others that are not. I touched upon that in the last video, and in this video, we're going to dive a bit more deeply into the generalizations that we can use to determine syllable accents. By the end of this video, my hope is that you understand syllabication accent generalizations within a variety of different patterns. So let's begin. And we're going to start with one-syllable words. And one-syllable words are considered to have a primary accent. In the intro to this video, I talked about multisyllabic words and how there's going to be one that is accented and others that are not. Because one-syllable words are just that, one syllable, it's always assumed that that vowel phoneme within that one-syllable word is accented. Let's look at two examples. The first example is the word cat, which is the very definition of a CVC word, consonant, vowel, consonant. We know based upon generalizations we've already touched upon that this word has the short A vowel sound within it. As such, that short A sound is accented within this syllable. For a word like stain, which also follows a CVC kind of pattern, ST as a consonant blend, AI as a long A vowel digraph, and the N as the final consonant. This word also has an accent because there's no other syllables in the word to not be accented. So any word that is one syllable is going to have an accent. When you go to look up these words in the dictionary, you may find that there is no accent mark. And the accent mark is an apostrophe. We will see this in the next example. But oftentimes with one syllable words, because it's only one syllable, these marks are left off. It's just assumed it's there. So with that, let's move into some multisyllabic words. And we're going to start with words that have affixes. With an affix, it's a prefix or a suffix, or sometimes both, that are added on to a root word. And in general, these prefixes and suffixes form separate syllables. The accent usually falls on or within that root word. Now, you're going to be covering root words and affixes in the next unit. But let me just give a brief demonstration of what I mean. So if we take the word mistaking, as in I am mistaking someone for someone else, it's comprised of a root word, take, as well as a prefix, miss, and a suffix, ing. According to this generalization, the addition of these two affixes, the prefix miss and the suffix ing, creates a total of 3 syllables, mistake-ing, 3 vowel sounds. Now, the accent falls on the root word, which is take. The root word is the word that the suffix and the prefix modify, much in the way that an onset is modified by a rhyme is modified by an onset. So these are individual words, like we're talking about pieces, affixes, prefixes, suffixes. Let's talk about compound words. And when we're thinking about a compound word, the primary accent in a compound word usually falls on or within that first word. So for instance, if we think about the word blueberry as a compound word comprising the word blue and the word berry, There's actually 3 total syllables here. There's the U sound, the ER sound, and the Y, which is making a long E sound. So we're just going to separate blue from the rest of berry for the sake of this generalization. And the accent in blueberry would follow that syllable. Now keep in mind that there would actually be 2 other syllables, blueberry. But for the sake of this generalization, we're just going to pay attention to that first word. Now let's move on from compound words to nouns and verbs. Oftentimes we will find words that can be both a noun as well as a verb. And one of the ways that we can distinguish whether or not a word is referring to a noun or referring to a verb is to pay attention to where the accent falls. In nouns, the accent usually falls on the first syllable. Conversely, a verb will often be the second or last syllable. Let's look at an example. A garden is both a thing as well as an action. Did these come out of your garden? If we're thinking about this as a noun, a garden as a noun, that accent comes after that first syllable. Did these come out of your garden? And you listen to that second syllable and it's that schwa sound, that unaccented vowel sound, versus I like to garden in my free time. Here we hear the E a little bit more clearly versus the schwa. Because this is a verb, I am doing this. This is something that is happening within my actions. I like to garden in my free time. Now, this works with words that can often be considered both a noun and a verb. Let's move into some spelling patterns. When we're thinking about double consonants, the accent usually falls on the syllable that closes on the first letter of that double consonant. Before we go further, you might be thinking to yourself, but wait, I thought when we saw 2 like consonants together in a word, they only made one sound. And to that I would say you are exactly correct. What I'm talking about here when I'm talking about double consonants are consonants that are not alike. Sometimes you will come across 2 like consonants that do actually make 2 individual sounds, so that could be worked into this generalization. But for the most part, I am talking here about consonants that are different. For instance, if we looked at the word slumber, and we separated these out, we're hearing 2 different vowel sounds, resulting in the first syllable slum and the second syllable burr. And because of the way this generalization works, the accent is within that first syllable. Now, we've talked about affixes already and how they form their own syllables and they usually take place in the root word. There are some suffixes, shun, shun, one with a T, one with an S, and ick, that change the nature of what a word means. And because of that, because of how they're often used, their relationship to root words gets a little tricky. And so they are worth mentioning that when these suffixes are being used, the primary accent usually falls on the syllable that comes right before these suffixes. So let's look at 3 examples. The first is the word portion. If we break this out into 2 syllables, because we're hearing 2 different vowel sounds, the accent comes right after. The accented syllable is the first syllable, pour. Same with frantic. Again, we're hearing that accent in that first syllable. And last but not least, tension. We're hearing that accent in that first syllable. Within all of these, we are hearing in that ION and the IC either the schwa sound or the short I sound. Let's talk a little bit about closed syllables. When the vowel phoneme in the last and closed syllable, so the syllable has to be both those things, contains two vowel letters, that syllable is most often accented. And the reason for that is because when we see two vowel letters, that often means that it's a long vowel sound. Let's look at two examples. Explain, for instance, is broken up into two syllables, explain. Now, because that AI is saying the letter name of the A in terms of the sound it's making, that's where the accent goes. Same with succeed. And succeed is one of those examples of words where two like consonants actually make separate sounds, succeed. Because the first is making a K sound, the second is making the S sound. But what we're paying attention to here is the fact that that double E is making a long E sound, meaning that that last syllable is going to be accented. So far, we've talked about a lot of generalizations, but there does come an occasional situation where there just are no other clues. If there are no other clues, if there's no inkling of any of these generalizations fitting, the accent most often falls on the first syllable of a two-syllable word. And this is something that works for us more times than not. If it's not sounding quite right, after we do this, we can flip it, put the accent on the second syllable, and see if that sounds a little more correct. So let's do an example with the word hustle. If we're thinking about the word hustle, then we're breaking it into two syllables, hus and sul. Now, there's not really any other clues that are happening here, so we're just going to assume that the accent is on that first syllable. And for this particular word, it makes sense because that LE usually is correlated with that schwa L sound, and that's where that begins to make sense for us. So in this video, we talked about generalizations around deciding accents in syllables, in which syllables are accented and which ones are not. One-syllable words have a primary accent that's just assumed. We may not see that mark in a dictionary. In general, affixes, prefixes, and suffixes often form separate syllables, and that accent usually falls on or within that root word that the affix gets attached to. In compound words that bring two words together, that accent usually falls on the first unit of the compound word. And for words that can be both nouns and verbs, like garden, the accent usually falls on the first syllable for nouns and on the second for the verb. When we see a double consonant, not two like consonants, but a double consonant, the accent usually falls on the syllable that closes with the first letter of that double consonant, like in slumber. In words ending with shun, T-I-O-N, shun, S-I-O-N, and ick, the accent falls on the syllable preceding the suffix, partially because of the fact that these contain a schwa sound and a short I sound. When the vowel phoneme in the last syllable of the word is composed of two vowel letters, which normally make a long vowel digraph, that is the syllable that is most often accented, because it's a long vowel sound. And then when there is no clue to the accent, it often falls to the first syllable in a two-letter word. In this video, we talked about accent generalizations. In the next video, we're going to talk about some of the generalizations that come into play when we divide words into these syllables.